Callum Reed stepped out of the black town car and straightened his tie without looking at the photographers. They called his name anyway. They always did. "Callum, are you here alone tonight?" "Mr. Reed, any comment on the merger?" He gave them nothing, not even a glance. He walked toward the entrance of the Fairmont Chateau Laurier as if the cold November air did not touch him, as if the gold light spilling from the lobby doors was something he had always been entitled to walk through. Inside, his former fiancée was about to marry someone else. He had known Margot Sinclair for 4 years. He had loved her, or believed he had, the way a man loves the idea of a life that looks correct from every angle. She was beautiful, composed, and perfectly suited to the world he moved in. She understood optics. She understood silence. She understood that a man in his position needed a partner who made him look whole even on the days he felt fractured. When his company began to collapse 18 months ago, she had not raised her voice. She had not cried or made a scene. She had simply sat across from him at the kitchen table in their Westmount townhouse, folded her hands, and said, "I didn't sign on to rebuild from zero, Callum. I'm sorry, I genuinely am." She had given back the ring in its original box. That detail stayed with him longer than anything else. The fact that she had kept the box, he had rebuilt himself, not quickly and not without cost. The kind of rebuilding that happens in silence without press releases or public appearances. The kind that requires a man to sit in a dark office at 2 in the morning and decide, again and again, that he still intends to exist. He was stronger now. The investors who had vanished were calling again, now embarrassed, now overeager. The people who had whispered about his fall were finding reasons to stand near him at functions like this one. But the wound had not closed. Not from missing Margot. He had stopped missing her within weeks. It was the other thing that stayed, the speed of it, the way she had folded her hands, the box. He had come tonight because she had invited him. He still did not fully understand why she had, and he suspected she did not fully understand either. But he had accepted because he wanted her to see that the story she had written about him was wrong. He wanted to walk into that room and be proof of her miscalculation. He was almost at the entrance when he saw her. She was sitting on the low stone ledge near the side of the building, just beyond the reach of the valet lights, not begging, not making any kind of scene. She was simply sitting with her knees together and her hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup, the kind that comes from a gas station, the kind that costs under $2 and goes cold fast. Her coat was too thin for November in Ottawa. Her hair had been caught by the wind, and she had pushed it back without caring much whether it stayed. She was looking at nothing in particular, just looking. She was 30-something, Callum guessed. There was nothing young or soft about her face. It was the face of someone who had been asked to carry too much for too long, and had done it anyway, without thanks, without complaint, and without anyone noticing. A hotel doorman walked toward her with the particular stiffness of someone who had been asked to handle this. "Ma'am, you can't be here. We have a private event." She looked up at him. Her voice was quiet and even. "I'm not in anyone's way. I need you to move along. The guests are arriving in cars that cost more than my rent. I know." She said it without bitterness, just plainly. "I'll finish my coffee and I'll go. I have to ask you to leave now." Callum was already walking toward them. "She's with me." Both of them looked at him. The doorman's posture shifted immediately. The woman's face did not shift at all, which Callum found oddly steadying. "Mr. Reed, I apologize, I didn't. It's fine." He looked at the doorman long enough to make it clear the conversation was finished. Then he looked at her. Up close, she was tired in a way that no amount of sleep would quickly fix. There were shadows under her eyes that had settled in and made themselves at home. Her cheekbones were sharp, her lips slightly chapped from the cold. On the left side of her jaw, just near the corner, there was a small scar, thin as a thread, pale against her skin. The kind of scar that could come from anything or nothing, but that made a face specific, made it a face you would not forget. "Are you warm enough?" he asked. She looked at him with the careful expression of someone who has learned to identify the difference between genuine interest and performance. She was still deciding which this was. "I'm managing. Have you eaten?" A pause. "Not recently." He extended his hand, not to shake. Just an open hand, palm up, the way you might offer something to someone who has learned to be cautious about taking. "Come inside." She looked at his hand, then at the entrance, then back at him. "You don't know me." "No," he agreed. "And you're going into a wedding?" "Yes." She glanced down at her clothes. The coat with the broken top button, the dark trousers that were clean but worn at the knees, the shoes that had seen 3 winters too many. "I look like I've been living in a bus shelter," she said, not with shame, just with accuracy. "You look like someone who decided to keep going when most people would have stopped. Come inside. Please take a moment before we continue. If this story is moving you at all, a like and a subscription to Rich Secrets Revealed means more than you might think. It's what makes it possible to keep bringing you stories like this one." Now, back to where we were. She stood slowly, the way someone moves when they are not entirely sure their body will cooperate. She was taller than he had expected. She tucked the paper cup into a nearby recycling bin with a precision that seemed habitual, like someone who had learned long ago to leave places the way she found them because no one was going to clean up after her. "I'm Callum," he said. "Ren," she said. Just the one name, the way people offer what they're willing to offer and wait to see what happens next. He held the door. The Fairmont's grand ballroom had been arranged the way old money arranges things when it wants to remind everyone in the room what old money looks like: ivory and gold. Long tables set with crystal that caught the candlelight and threw it in every direction, the kind of flowers that had been flown in from somewhere warmer. A string quartet near the far wall playing something classical and unobtrusive. A room full of people wearing their most expensive version of casual confidence. The room noticed Callum first. It always noticed Callum first in any room he entered. He had that quality that certain people carry without being able to explain it. The quality of making a space rearrange itself slightly in response to his presence. Then the room noticed Ren. The silence moved through the guests in a slow wave, starting at the entrance and spreading outward. People who had been mid-conversation stopped. People who had been reaching for their wine paused. Eyes moved from Callum to the woman beside him, with the thin coat and the wind-blown hair and the quiet, upright posture of someone who had nothing left to perform. Ren felt it. Callum saw her feel it, saw the slight change in her breathing, the way her jaw tightened just slightly. He leaned close. "Don't lower your chin." She said nothing for a moment. Then, softly, "They're not being subtle." "No," he agreed. "They rarely are." He placed his hand at the small of her back, lightly, and walked her toward the front of the room, as if they had always intended to be exactly here. Margot Sinclair was standing near the head table in a dress the color of winter light, pale and deliberate and expensive. She saw Callum almost immediately. Something moved across her face, something that lived between regret and recalculation. And then she composed herself, which took less than 2 seconds, because composure was the thing Margot did better than almost anything else. Then she saw Ren, and composure took a little longer. Her new husband, Jeffrey Holt, leaned close and said something to her. Margot did not respond. She was watching Callum guide this woman across the room as if she belonged there, as if she had always belonged there. As Callum led Ren to their seats, he heard the whispers. "Did he bring someone from outside? Is that his coat she's wearing? God, what is he doing?" Ren heard them too. He felt her fingers close slightly around his arm. "What they're actually saying," Callum said quietly, "is that they wish they'd thought to do something like this first." She looked at him sideways. "That's a generous interpretation. It's the correct one." They sat. Callum poured water into both glasses. The woman beside him on the other side gave Ren a long look, slow look that was meant to be felt, and it was. Ren looked down at the tablecloth for a moment. "Look up," Callum said, not unkindly. She did. "You are not the strange thing in this room," he said. "The strange thing in this room is everyone pretending that the way people are dressed tells you anything important about who they are." Ren was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You speak like someone who's been on the other side of that judgment." Callum said nothing. But she was not wrong. The ceremony was held in the adjoining hall. Callum sat through it with the stillness of a man who has made peace with something, or is very convincingly pretending he has. The officiant spoke about commitment, about choosing someone on the ordinary days, and not only the extraordinary ones. About showing up. Callum's jaw tightened once. Just once. Ren noticed. She said nothing for a long moment. Then, under the sound of the officiant's voice. Was it very serious? Between you and her? Callum considered the question the way he considered most things, carefully, without hurry. I thought it was. I'm not sure it was ever what I believed it to be. Wren looked ahead at the ceremony. That's a lonelier feeling than just being left. Callum looked at her. She met his eyes briefly, knowing it wasn't real. That's harder. Yes, he said. And that was the most honest thing he had said to anyone in a long time. She looked back at the ceremony. Then don't let her see you carry it. That's the only thing worth protecting right now. Callum held her gaze for a moment, and something in him that had been braced for the entire evening slowly released its grip. He had brought her inside because he was angry at a doorman's cruelty. He had not expected her to be this. The reception unfolded the way these evenings always do, with toasts that were too long and food that was too precious, and conversations that were primarily performances. Callum moved through it with Wren close, not as a display, but because leaving her alone in this room felt like something he was not willing to do. A man near the bar, someone Callum vaguely recognized from the financial sector, said something to his companion while looking at Wren, and said it just loudly enough. Wren stopped walking. For a moment she just stood there. Callum turned to face the man. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked at him with the particular quality of stillness that had, in boardrooms and courtrooms and difficult negotiations, made rooms go quiet without a single word being raised. The man looked away first. Wren touched Callum's arm. It's all right. It isn't, he said, but we don't have to make it a scene. She looked at him. You didn't have to do that? I know. A pause. Why did you? Callum thought about it. Because someone should have, a long time before tonight. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, You're a difficult person to understand. I'm actually not, he said. Most people just don't bother. At some point in the evening, Margot found her way to them. She arrived with the studied ease of a woman who had rehearsed this moment without admitting she'd rehearsed it. Callum, she said, kissing the air near his cheek. I'm glad you came. I wasn't sure you would. Neither was I, he said. Margot's eyes moved to Wren with a smile that was technically a smile. And you've brought someone. How lovely. I don't think we've been introduced. Wren said. Margot tilted her head. Just Callum said, yes. The word landed in the space between them like something with weight. Margot laughed softly. I'm only being friendly. You're being something, Callum said, but I don't think friendly is quite it. Margot's smile held. Her eyes did not. Wren looked at her directly and said, without heat and without performance. You had someone who rebuilt himself from nothing because he refused to stop. And the thing you're carrying right now in your face, that's not happiness. That's a woman who knows she made a calculation and is starting to wonder if the numbers were right. The silence was complete. Margot's expression went very still. Jeffrey appeared at her shoulder and said something about the photographer needing them. Margot left without another word, though she glanced back once quickly the way people do when they want to see if something has changed and hope it hasn't. Callum looked at Wren. You didn't have to do that either, he said. I know, she said. A pause. You've been carrying that room on your shoulders all evening. I came here to make a point, he said. Did it work? He thought about it honestly, less than I expected, more than I needed. She smiled at that. Just a little. And the small smile did something Callum had not anticipated and was not ready to name. It was sometime after the third toast that an older man approached them from across the room. His name was Bernard Okafor, and he was one of the few people in this room Callum genuinely respected. A former federal judge, now semi-retired, who had built a career and a reputation on the belief that what a person is made of has very little to do with what they're wearing when you meet them. He walked slowly, with the dignity of a man who has nothing left to prove and knows it. Callum, he said, taking his hand to see you here. She invited me, Callum said, still not entirely sure why. Bernard smiled. Life has a sense of irony that occasionally borders on genius. He turned to Wren with the warm attention of a man who looks at people rather than through them. And then he stopped. He looked at her face for a long moment, not rudely. With the particular quality of recognition, the way a person looks when a memory surfaces that they had long stopped expecting to surface. His eyes moved slowly from the shape of her face to the line of her jaw, and then to the small scar near the corner of her jaw, thin and pale as a crescent. He seemed to have difficulty finding words. "Sir," Callum said. "Are you all right?" Bernard held up one hand gently. He was still looking at Ren. "Forgive me," he said. "I didn't mean to be discourteous. It's just—" He stopped. "I need to ask you something, your name." Ren looked at him carefully. Ren what?" She hesitated. There was something in the old man's expression, not threatening, not intrusive, but wounded and searching, the expression of someone following a thread they had dropped years ago and never expected to find again. Callum straightened slightly. "Why do you ask?" Bernard looked at him, then back at her. "Please, it matters more than I can explain quickly." Ren held the old man's gaze for a moment. Then she said quietly, "Ren Casterly." The sound of the room seemed to recede from Bernard's hearing. He put one hand on the back of a nearby chair. "Casterly," he whispered. Ren's heart had begun to move at a different speed. "Do you know that name?" Bernard looked at her again, and there were tears at the edges of his eyes, which was not something anyone in the room would have expected from a man whose composure had been remarked upon in 3 decades of courtrooms. "Where are you from?" he asked. "Originally, I'm not sure anymore," Ren said, and there was something raw in the way she said it. Something that had been put away and now refused to stay. "I was 8 when my mother died. There was a fire. I was moved around after that. No one kept records the way they should have. After a certain point, I stopped asking." Bernard's mouth opened and closed once, without making a sound. Callum was watching him closely. "What is it?" Bernard set down his glass with the careful movements of a man making sure his hands stay steady. "The fire," he said, "in Caledon, 15 years ago." Ren went very still. "How do you know about that?" He looked at her. "Because I was the estate lawyer for your mother's family. The Casterlys. Your grandmother retained me for 20 years. Your mother, Elise, she was the last of that line. When she died and you disappeared after the fire, we searched. We searched for a long time." His voice had dropped to almost nothing. "You have her jaw, her eyes, and that scar." "Elise had a scar in the same place. She told me she got it as a child." Ren shook her head, slowly. The room had grown very far away. "There is a trust," Bernard said. "Your mother established it before she died. It was set up specifically in your name, to be held until you were found or until it was established beyond doubt that you could not be found. My firm has maintained it for 15 years. No one touched it. No one ever stopped believing you might still be out there." His voice broke slightly on the last sentence, and he permitted it to break because he was 81 years old and had been waiting a long time to say this. "We never closed the file." Callum's hand found the small of Ren's back again, not lightly this time, steady. Ren was looking at Bernard with the expression of someone standing at the edge of something enormous, trying to find a foothold before stepping out onto it. "Why would she leave something for me?" Ren's voice was barely a sound. "We had nothing." "That's not entirely true," Bernard said gently. "The Casterly name had been quiet for a long time, yes. But your grandmother's estate, before it passed to your mother, had been placed in trust precisely because your grandmother knew money and grief rarely travel together without one destroying the other. The principal had been accumulating for 30 years by the time your mother passed." He reached into his jacket pocket with the deliberate movement of a man who carries important things carefully, and produced a card. "I would like very much to sit down with you when you're ready. There's no urgency. There's never been urgency. There's only been waiting." Ren took the card with both hands. The people nearby had gone very quiet, not the whispering quiet of earlier, when they had been cataloging her coat and her shoes and the cup she'd been holding inside. This was the quiet of a room recalibrating, of people who had made a judgment and were now sitting inside the discomfort of having been wrong. Ren looked at Callum. Her eyes were full. "You knew nothing about any of this," she said. "Nothing," he said. "Then why?" She stopped. Started again. "Why did you come across that road?" Callum looked at her for a long moment, and there was no performance in his face, no strategy, no point being made. "Because I've been on the receiving end of a room deciding your worth based on a bad quarter," he said. "And someone should have come across the road for me too." She cried then, not loudly, the quiet kind of crying that happens when you have finally decides it's allowed. Callum didn't look away and didn't offer her a reason to compose herself. He simply stayed where he was, close, his hand steady. Bernard stepped back to give them space, wiping his own eyes with the back of his hand and not particularly caring who saw. Across the room, Margot Sinclair watched. She had spent the evening in the glow of the life she had chosen, the life she had chosen over Callum's uncertain future. The flowers had been extraordinary. The champagne was exactly what she had specified. Jeffrey was handsome and reliable, and his portfolio had not declined in 4 years. And yet she was standing at her own wedding reception watching the man she had left hold a woman as if she was the most important thing in the room. Not for the cameras, not for the guests, just because she was. Margot looked down at her champagne. She drank it without tasting it. Callum stepped away briefly, without explanation, without making it a moment. He walked to a quiet corner of the lobby and made 2 phone calls. The first was brief, the second was slightly longer. He spoke in a low voice and was specific about what was needed. He returned to Ren and said only, "Come with me for a few minutes." She followed him to one of the hotel's private sitting rooms, where a woman was waiting with a garment bag and a small case. Callum introduced her as a colleague, which was technically accurate. She ran the best styling consultancy in the city, and Callum had quietly retained her for 3 separate events in the past 2 years. He had described the dress over the phone in fewer words than it deserved. Deep emerald green, he had said. Floor length, clean lines, something that looks like it was waiting for her. When Ren stepped out of the sitting room 20 minutes later, the dress was all of those things and then some. Silk charmeuse, deep green as a northern lake in October, falling in a clean, unbroken line from shoulder to floor. Her hair had been loosely arranged, not stiffened or overdone, just gathered in a way that left her face open and unguarded. She wore no jewelry, except a pair of small gold drops that the stylist had pressed on her with quiet insistence. She stood outside the sitting room door for a moment, smoothing the fabric at her hip. "I feel like someone else," she said. "No," Callum said. "You feel like yourself when the world isn't leaning on you." She looked at him for a moment. Then she straightened and walked toward the ballroom doors. The room went quiet for the second time that evening. Ren walked in without hurrying. Her steps were measured, her chin level, her eyes straight ahead. The emerald gown caught the candlelight differently than the ivory and the gold around her. It did not compete. It simply was, completely and without apology. She was not the woman they had whispered about at the entrance. She was not the woman they had photographed on their phones to send to group chats with captions that assumed they understood her. She was something they had not made room for in their assumptions, and the room was doing the quiet, uncomfortable work of making room for her now. Callum was standing near the edge of the dance floor when he saw her come through the doors. He did not think about it. He walked toward her before she had to walk the whole room alone. "You look extraordinary," he said. "Don't make me cry again," she said. "This took 20 minutes. He laughed, actually laughed, and it caught him off guard. And she saw it catch him off guard. And something passed between them in that moment that had nothing to do with revenge or point-making, or the woman across the room in the ivory gown. Bernard rose from his seat when Ren reached the center of the room. He did not have the microphone this time. He simply stood, and because everyone who knew Bernard knew what it meant when he stood, the room settled itself around him. "I had not planned to say anything tonight beyond the usual pleasantries," he said, and his voice carried without effort. The voice of a man who had spoken into difficult silences for decades. "But this evening has given me something I did not expect." He looked at Ren directly. 15 years ago, a family lost a child. They didn't lose her to distance or to disagreement or to the ordinary ways families come apart. They lost her to fire, to grief, and to a system that moved her from place to place until no one remembered her name or thought to ask what had happened to the girl. He paused. "I remembered. I kept looking. Tonight I found her." The room was entirely still. "This is Ren Casterly," Bernard said. "Her mother was one of the most honorable people I ever had the privilege of serving. And her daughter has been sitting in this room tonight, in the cold outside this room, before that, being looked at the way we look at people when we've decided they can't matter to us, He looked around the room with the calm precision of a man who does not need to raise his voice to make a room feel its own discomfort. I am asking you to update your understanding. No one spoke. Then Callum began to clap. It was unhurried and unself-conscious, the way he did most things that mattered. One person joined him, then three. Then, in the way these moments move, the whole room was standing, and the applause was the kind that comes from different places and different people. Some of them moved, some of them ashamed, all of them wanting to be on the right side of something for once. Ren stood at the center of it and let it reach her. She had been strong for 15 years. She had moved when she was told to move, adapted when she had to adapt, asked for nothing and received less. She allowed herself, for this one moment, to receive something. Callum was beside her. His hand found hers. She looked up at him, and he looked back, and then he pulled her gently in and held her. Not for the room, not for Margot, not for any of the reasons he had walked through those doors 2 hours ago. Just because she was there and she was real, and something in him that had been sealed for a long time had opened tonight, and he did not want to close it again. He kissed her once, quietly, carefully, the way you touch something you did not expect to find and are not yet certain you deserve. She did not pull back. Margot was watching from across the room. Jeffrey said something to her and she nodded without hearing it. She watched Callum lift a hand to Ren's face and wipe one tear away with his thumb, watched him say something low that made her close her eyes, watched him keep his hand there, patient and unhurried, as if the evening had nowhere else it needed to go. She had left him because she thought the calculation was simple. Assets, stability, future value. She had run the numbers and acted on them, and she had been certain. She was less certain now. The rest of the evening held differently after that. The room that had been performing at one another, across long tables, slowly became something more like people, and the conversation grew quieter and more honest, the way conversations sometimes do when something true has happened in a room, and everyone can feel that the usual rules have been briefly suspended. Callum stayed close to Ren. When someone approached with the false warmth of retrospective goodwill, he read her face and answered for her, until she gave him a look that said she was ready to answer for herself, and then he stepped back and let her. When the music began and she hesitated, he offered his hand and she took it, and they moved slowly on the dance floor, not with any particular skill, just with the ease of two people who had stopped pretending to be something other than what they were. Ren rested her cheek briefly against his shoulder. "I came here to figure out where to sleep tonight," she said. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "You don't have to figure that out alone anymore." She lifted her head and looked at him. "I mean it practically first," he said. "My family has a guest house that's been empty for 2 years. Bernard will need time to process everything. You should have somewhere stable to think from." She studied his face. "And not practically?" Callum looked at her steadily. "Not practically. I think you're the most honest person I've met in a very long time, and I've been surrounded by people who were very good at being something other than honest." Ren was quiet. "You don't know me." "No," he said. "I'd like to." She looked away for a moment, out at the room, the candlelight, the ivory flowers, the table where Margot sat with her correct and reliable life. Then she looked back at him. "All right," she said, "not with drama. Not with ceremony, just with the plain, clear yes of someone who has been lost long enough to recognize when something is worth turning toward." Month later, after the lawyers had done their quiet, necessary work, and Bernard had sat with Ren for many long, careful hours, and the trust had been released, and the Casterly name had been restored in the ways that names get restored. After all of that, Callum proposed in the kitchen of the guest house on a Tuesday morning, with no ring yet, because he had not found one he thought was worthy of her, and he had decided honesty was better than waiting. She said yes before he finished the sentence. Their wedding was small and took place in late September in the Caledon Hills, near where Ren had last felt like she had a home. Bernard was there. The stylist was there. A handful of people who had been in the room at the Fairmont, some of whom had whispered and had since found their own way to make it right, were there too. Margot was not there, and that was fine, and Jeffrey was not there, and that was also fine. Callum and Ren stood in the late afternoon light, with the maples going red around them, and said the kind of vows that people say when they've already learned what they actually mean. In the years that followed, their house was full of the ordinary noise of a life being lived without performance. It was not always easy. It was not always quiet. There were mornings that were harder than others, and nights when old wounds made themselves known in the body before the mind had time to prepare. But they faced those mornings and nights with the particular courage of two people who had each, in their own way, survived the moment when everything collapsed, and who had decided that surviving was not the same as living, and that what they wanted was to live. Wren kept the card Bernard had given her that night. She framed it, not sentimentally, but as a reminder, she said, that the right person, at the right moment, asking the right question, can change the entire direction of a life. Callum kept the memory of her sitting on that stone ledge, with the paper coffee cup in the November cold. Back straight, head up, looking at nothing in particular but refusing to fold. He thought about it on days when the weight of things seemed unreasonable. It helped.